You're listening to Nightlight Radio Network. This is Dr. Bob Hieronimus, co-host of 21st Century Radio. We are happy to present this rebroadcast of our show on Nightlight. Where was Jesus for the first 30 years of his life? I wondered that for decades. Yes. Where and what was he taught? And who were his teachers? Well, based on new information, culled from the hard-to-find Vatican texts, theosophical classics, legends, and hermetic symbolism, Tricia McCannon constructs a radical new picture of Jesus and his times. She asserts that Jesus spent at least 7 years in Egypt, a number of years in England, and visited both India and Tibet before beginning his public ministry in Palestine. Now, this is a wide-ranging examination of the direct links and similarities between Jesus' teachings and those of a variety of mystery religions and sects that were popular during his lifetime, including the Essenes, the Buddhists, and Druids. McCannon offers compelling evidence that places Jesus' life and mission firmly in the context of the profound spiritual teachings that came before him. Drawing on records from the Vatican, Tibet, India, and Egypt, along with Greek, Aramaic, and Pali texts, as well as oral traditions of Jesus' teachings, McCannon uncovers the real reason that he has remained such a powerful and pivotal figure in world consciousness for over 2 millennia. Tricia McCannon is a renowned clairvoyant teacher and mystical symbologist. She is the author of 2 books, Dialogues with the Angels and Jesus, the Explosive Story of the 30 Lost Years, and the Ancient Mystery Religions. She has been a featured speaker at conferences in the U.S., England, and Europe, and has appeared on radio and TV shows, including Coast to Coast, AM, Whitley Strieber's Dreamland, and the director of the Phoenix Fire Lodge Mystery School. She lives in Atlanta, Georgia. Welcome back to 21st Century Radio, Tricia.
Oh, hi, Bob. What a pleasure it is to be with everybody on this beautiful day.
Well, I am pretty excited about talking about this book because it unravels a lot of mysteries that we have been poking at for about 30 years. And 30...
Yes, it does indeed. And, I think the life of Jesus is one of the greatest mysteries of, really of the ages. And these last 2,000 years, there have been a lot of people who've really sought to understand it and to decode it. But as we know, in the New Testament, there's a whole lot of open space. We kind of only know, like, of the nativity and his birth, and then that whole incident when he's 12 years old and gets to go to the temple, and then there's big space, big
yeah.
space. And then we have the stories from Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John about when his ministry begins. And so, as you know, and I wanted to mention to you, I know we're going to be primarily talking about Jesus, but I have to send you an updated bio because, as you may or may not remember, I had a third book come out.
Well, that was my next question.
Coming out in the fall with one of your wonderful books and your wife's book. So the third book is called The Return of the Divine Sophia, Healing the Earth Through the Lost Wisdom Teachings of Jesus, Isis, and Mary Magdalene. So that one has at least 5 chapters on Jesus' hidden teachings and so forth. So it's also very relevant to what we're doing today. And then the one that's coming out in with Inner Traditions, which is your wife's publisher as well as mine, is called The Angelic Origins of the Soul, Discovering Your Divine Purpose. And so, they're all linked together because I definitely consider myself a mystical Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of want to just put that out there right away because, when we say a radical reinterpretation and so forth, I think it's very important for people to understand that there are so many people who have read this book the last 2 or 3 years since it's been out, and I get letters and emails and phone calls from people all the time, people who are like, I never even liked Jesus. I never even got Jesus. And they read this book, and they're like, I love him.
Mm-hmm.
He is great because you get him at an entirely different level that's not just sort of what the church has told us with religion, which is I think a little confusing because, we've got the Old Testament, which seems to be a God of blame and vengeance and punishment and threats, and then we have the New Testament God, which is a God of love and forgiveness and wholeness and kindness, and, the kingdom is within. And for a lot of people in the Judeo-Christian world, I think it's very difficult to kind of reconcile these two pictures. And so I think that these two books about Jesus and then the Divine Sophia really address how to come to terms and reconcile what's going on with some of our religious literature and how to put it in the right context historically and to fill in the blanks along the way.
Well, you are an enormously busy person. Tell us where you've just been. What have you been up to?
Well, I just came from New York. I was up in New York speaking actually at the ARE, or the Association for, it's the Edgar Cayce Center, basically. I think it's the Association for Research and Enlightenment. But, their headquarters is in Virginia Beach, and I was very honored to go up and speak in New York at the center. I did a whole program actually on Atlantis and all this amazing evidence that they're finding. In the last 200 years, we've discovered over 500 lost or hidden cities, many of them underwater, enormous pyramids, off the coast of Okinawa, Japan, and Yogaguni, which was probably part of Lemuria, and whoever was living there, they were obviously giants, because you'd have to be a giant to take the steps up the pyramids that size. And then we kind of made our way over and looking at, of course, the island of Santorini, or Thera, which is, in the Mediterranean or the Aegean. Then we made our way over to the coast of Spain and Portugal, taking a look at these pyramids that they found underwater near the Azores, which are just absolutely beautiful islands, and also ruins they found inside the Straits of Gibraltar. And, of course, we know from Plato that Atlantis was outside the Straits of Gibraltar. So these may be people that survived and moved inland and kind of tried to recreate their culture, but there's an incredible underwater park there that's like temples with Athena, and, just like what you'd imagine Atlantis would look like. And then we went all the way over to the Bahamas and the Caribbean and Havana, Cuba, where they found incredible ruins. So I'm going to be speaking on Atlantis, actually, in Los Angeles, in Venice Beach, and Irvine, California. And then I'll probably be doing a tour around Atlantis and these lost civilizations up the West Coast in Mount Shasta and Eugene and Ashland and Oregon, Portland, Oregon, and Seattle and Vancouver. And then I have this new book coming out along with your wife's wonderful book, which looks fabulous, by the way, Bob. The one about the mystical white animals and the spirit animals. I want to read it, and I want to do a if you'll have me, I'll do a review for you, because that looks like a great book.
It is a great book, and the fact that she can communicate and has been communicating with animals since she was a child has made a very big difference in the happiness in her life, because in so many ways animals can help heal us as we help them at the same time. Of course, I'm really quite biased in this area, because my wife is my mentor in this particular area. I had no idea about 40 years ago that dogs or any animal had the kind of consciousness they had. It was really wonderful growing and learning that. And I look forward to other people knowing and what she's learned and how she's been able to do things. Thank you. I'll let her know that right now.
Let me just say that I know that there's this really amazing thing that is happening on the planet, and where there are these white animals being born, white buffalo, white wolves, white, of course, we always have white rabbits and things like that, but there's a lot, like white llamas. There's a whole series of white animals that are being born. And, of course, in the Native American prophecy, this is linked to the fact that, humanity is at a crossroads, and we can either go down the path of selfishness and greed and exploitation and destroying the earth, or we can choose a higher path, with kindness, more forget the war stuff that we seem to be so addicted to, with more unity consciousness, where we come up with healthier energy systems that are not destroying our planet like fracking is, and all these gas and oil things that we seem to be so enmeshed in. As we can see that there seem to be really, the strong money people, a lot of them have been behind this old system, and it's very hard to allow it to transform, which is a shame. So these white animals, I think, are very much about giving us hope for the fact that we can make a different set of choices if we'll pay attention and honor the opportunity that's being presented to us instead of going down this path of desecration, basically.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that Zoe will speak a great deal more about it. And I'm really looking forward to hearing more.
Well, she'd be really interested in talking with you and sharing that information because obviously you have the same kind of information.
Well, I think we're all on the same page about where we are, and it's a very critical time. And this is one of the reasons I think that understanding the deeper role of Jesus and also the deeper role of Mary Magdalene and the divine feminine and bringing the feminine and masculine back into balance in the world is so critical. And, again, and we're going to hopefully go down that path with our conversation, but along that lines, I want to mention your wonderful book, that last wonderful book that you wrote about Lady Liberty, which I had the pleasure of reading. It was excellent, by the way.
Thank you.
And you not only dealt with grounded history and how the Statue of Liberty, came to be, but also the deeper roots of this wisdom culture that had to do with the divine feminine.
Yeah.
And so I know that's a subject you know a great deal about.
Well, my producer actually did major work in this when I had to take over doing murals again. It kept getting in my life that I had to finish. She came in and made sure that you see that bibliography we have, 17 pages of it?
Oh my gosh. We are two after the same, on the same page. I have 100 pages of footnotes, bibliographies, and glossaries. And of course, when you're reading it, you don't feel like it's dense.
That's
just
right.
Like with your book.
Yeah.
You feel like it's totally readable. It's fun to read. You can't wait to get to the next chapter. But you can see the depth and breadth of the research in both of our books because we're willing to do the research and do the work. And to me, I look at it like a trail of breadcrumbs that we have left so that if people really want to know more, we've given them, this enormous body of information. But if they're like, I don't know, that's not what I was taught in Sunday school, they can actually go back and check it out for themselves.
Yeah.
And I think that's very valuable.
Well, thank you. Obviously, I think that's we're on the same page and have been for a long time. Throughout your book, we got to take a break. We're going to take a break here with our guest, Tricia McCannon. And the book we're going to discuss this evening is Jesus, the Explosive Story of the 30 Lost Years and the Ancient Mystery Religions. Now, let me tell you, this is a multiple genius that's put this together. And that's one of the reasons why it goes, so deep and uses quality references which really make the difference as far as I'm concerned about believability. We'll be back with our guest in just a few minutes.
This is Elaine Pagels, author of the Gnostic Gospels and also of a new book called Revelations, Visions, Prophecy, and Politics in the Book of Revelation. I'm a professor of religion at Princeton University, and you are listening to 21st Century Radio with Dr. Bob Hieronimus.
You can visit Tricia's website for more info on her books and readings and talks. That's Tricia McCannon, McCannon.com, TriciaMcCannon.com. Well, Tricia, throughout your book, you frequently write that you never intended to write this book, but you ended up writing it anyway. Why?
That is such a great question, Bob. Yeah, I live in Atlanta, and I grew up here in the Deep South, and maybe like a lot of people who are listening to this, there were certain things that I heard that didn't make sense to me. My dad was Baptist, so it was hellfire, brimstone, and damnation, and then my mom was Methodist, and then we wound up, going around to other churches trying to find a better fit for us, and something that wasn't so angry, basically, and fearful and scary. And we went to Presbyterian and Lutheran, went to a bunch of churches, and they're all cool in different ways. But we settled on an Episcopalian church, and I was confirmed there when I was 13. And I definitely grew up in the church, and I loved Episcopalian. I consider it like Catholic light. You got all the cool stuff like the incense and the ceremony, but without the guilt and the shame and so forth. And so I had always thought Jesus was wonderful, but my older sister became a fundamentalist, and she married a fundamentalist preacher. So in the name of Jesus, I saw a lot of things being done just at the family level that were really off. And, judgment and blame and punishment and beating and whipping and all with Jesus' name attached to it. And so I really basically kind of had it. It's like, I'd had it crammed down my throat to the point that it was like, I really just forget it.
Sure.
If this is how it's going to look in religion, there's something wrong with this picture. It doesn't, somehow this kind of judgment abuse that I saw associated with many religions, not just fundamentalist Christianity. You see it in the Muslim religion. You've seen it in some things in the Jewish religion. It didn't work for me. And so the last thing I ever intended to do was write a book on Jesus. But what happened for me was I went to college, Florida State University, and, then came out and became a commercial photographer. But as you know, I'm a clairvoyant, and I had seen angels since the time I was a little girl. I had been speaking with masters. When I was 19 years old, I had a group of masters called the Viragi appear to me and began to, they had a map to all the multidimensional levels of reality. They taught the ancient science of soul travel, which is the ability every one of us have to shift our consciousness to where we're able to travel beyond our physical body while we're still alive in the physical world into these higher realms and regions, so we don't have to just, wait to find out when we die. And so, I really had gone on to study Egyptian mysteries, Celtic mysteries, Native American mysteries, the ancient goddess teachings. Many traditions, and I really saw how they all work together, from the Druids to the Essenes and so forth. And so I was writing a book really about the mysteries. And I had put into the book 3 little chapters on Jesus because I happen to think Jesus is very important. I love his message, that love is the answer and forgiveness is the key, and that the kingdom of heaven's within, and judge not lest ye be judged. And so, we reap what we sow. So many things he said really resonated with me. And so before I knew it, I had 200 pages inside of what was now a 600-page book, which the publishers aren't going to like a 600-page book.
No, they don't.
For them, that's 3 200-page books.
Yeah.
So I thought, what am I going to do? I just don't know. So I decided, I know what I'm going to do. I'm just going to take out the section on Jesus, and that's going to solve my space problem. So it was the week after Christmas. Everything was very quiet, that kind of like deep cave time we go into after everyone has run around in the flurry of Christmas and holidays. And so I was laying on the floor of my office. I had just made that decision, and I had my hand over my eyes, and I became aware of this bright light shining down on me. And I moved my arm, and there, standing in the room with me, not 12 feet away, was Jesus in his golden light body. And he was about 6'1". He was, he had, that kind of the wavy hair to the shoulder like you expect. He had the gray, blue eyes. He was radiant, and his energy just pierced my heart. His presence is so strong, it just totally expands your heart. And without any preamble, he said, I want you to write a book about my lost years and secret teachings. There has been enough war and bloodshed in my name. And I tell you, Bob, it was like an arrow pierced my heart. And I was just so in amazement. When I could even gather my thoughts, I think I thought, well, well, can I finish this other book because I'm running out of money? I mean, aren't we funny? We're just so mundane and human.
I know.
And he smiled and he waved his hand and he said, don't worry, it'll just take a moment. I'll open every door. And, of course, it took 3 years. I wound up remortgaging my house twice to pay my bills. But I guess in the mind of God, 3 years is not even a blink of an eye. And, in fact, he did open every door. I wound up with a wonderful agent and a wonderful publisher. And it was quite a journey. It really did take 3 years. And because I'm I was a commercial photographer and I'm a clairvoyant, I process everything visually. And as a clairvoyant, when I read for people's soul records on the time track, I see everything like a movie. And so I wound up putting together a profound series of DVD PowerPoint presentations on the Egyptian mysteries, the Jewish mysteries, and the Christian mysteries. And I started the book 6 months later. And from that point on, there was miracle after miracle. I had people who would show up at my house with hidden text that Joseph of Arimathea had brought to England in 37 A.D. when he set up the very first, Christian community. I had books materialized on my shelf. I had this missionary who came to see me who brought me some of his secret books that he had spent a lifetime. He and his father were both missionaries collecting. I had been to the Vatican. I wound up getting access to some of the hidden teachings within the Vatican that most people don't know about. It was an extraordinary journey, and Jesus was in my house really day and night. About 3 months into working on this book, I had these friends come and visit me. It was probably the end of August, and I had started in the beginning of June. And they brought this little 5-year-old girl with them, a Mayan girl that they had adopted. They had been living in Central America. They were from L.A. originally. And they stayed in my house, and she slept in the bed, the guest room, and I had been sleeping in the guest room because it was about 10 feet from my computer. It was like one of those Jack and Jill bedrooms with a bathroom in between, and they were waking me up at all times of the day and night. And so she, of course, we didn't even talk about what I was doing because my friend was a radio announcer and he had a lot of other cool stuff going on with him. So the next morning we went to go to breakfast, and I had gotten this beautiful little teddy bear for this little girl, and I gave her the bear, and I said, now you can name this bear anything you want. And she said, Issa. And I said, oh, you mean Alyssa? Thinking, didn't compute. She shook her head. She said, no, Issa. I said, you mean Eliza, Elizabeth? And she shook her head. She said, no, Issa. Well, Issa is the name Jesus called himself when he went to all these different lands. That's why the Egyptian Christian church, a Coptic church of Issa. In India, he was known as Issa. In the Druid lands, he was known as Issa. In Ireland and England and Scotland, Issa, Lord Issa. And he had come to visit me, obviously, that night, as he had every night, to download what he wanted me to do with this book. And the little girl was in the room, and she was psychic enough to have picked up on his presence. And that's why she wanted to name this bear Issa. And so the whole process of writing, it was miraculous. I travel and teach and speak everywhere, in Europe and in America, and I couldn't leave my house. I was like handcuffed by spirit to the computer in the process of writing this book. And as you know, it has over 100 illustrations, over 1,200 footnotes, and it's a tour de force of the great spiritual mysteries and where he traveled and what they taught, and how what they taught is also reflected in his teachings. And then because he had asked me to write a book about his lost years and secret teachings, although there's some secret teachings in the Jesus book, of course, I had about 200 pages I had to pull out of that book. And so that 200 pages wound up in the book, The Return of the Divine Sophia, which was the next book that I wrote, Healing the Earth Through the Lost Wisdom Teachings of Jesus, Isis, and Mary Magdalene, where we begin to take a look at how Jesus understood that the masculine and feminine had gotten out of balance in the world, and how important it was to bring it back into balance. So he called God the Abba Father, Amma God, the Father Mother God, or the Mother Father God. And he said that there's a divine Father Mother, and there's also a divine daughter and son, and that periodically they come to earth to help humanity, even as I and Mary Magdalene have come to earth. Now, he also said that he cannot return until the divine feminine is re-enthroned in the world.
Oh, my.
So, of course, those people the patriarchy who's in power, I think that they want to hold on to their power. So it behooved them to basically, minimize Mary Magdalene's role, turn her into a prostitute, which she certainly was not. She was actually put in charge of the inner teachings of the church, the Christian church, where Peter was put in charge of the outer teachings. And this is, of course, how all the great mystery schools were across the world. There was an exoteric or outer school that taught moral principles like the Ten Commandments. And then there was an inner school that really taught the inner spiritual connection. So Peter was the outer, the rock, and Mary Magdalene, or Mary the Magdala, Mary the Great, was meant to teach the inner. And actually, this is one of the things that I discovered through my research, was that for many years after the crucifixion, after Joseph of Arimathea and Mary Magdalene, Mary Salome, Mary Jacobi, Mary the Mother, and some of the disciples fled to the south of France and then made their way finally up to Britain and settled in Britain, although some were left, like Lazarus in France as the first bishop, I think, of the church. I discovered that every 3 years there were conclaves on the Isle of Cyprus where Mary Magdalene would come and teach, and Christians from all around in that area would come for like 2 weeks. And she would teach in the morning, and then it would be open for discussion and understanding, and people to, put in what their thoughts were in the course of the afternoon. And, of course, we've lost all this in our human history. And the early Gnostics believed that Mary Magdalene was actually an incarnation of the divine Sophia, or the divine mother-daughter principle. And she had over 250 of her own wisdom sayings that they collected that are just as profound as what Jesus had to say, and totally in line with what Jesus had to say. So, it's been quite a journey to be in the energy of these beings, because not only were all these masters coming to see me during those 3 years, but then when I began to work on the Sophia book, I had all these aspects of the divine feminine coming in. And as you know, I'm an artist, and, I did about 100 illustrations for each one of these books. And as I would draw, the presences of those divine aspects of the divine father, mother, daughter, son would come and kind of work through my hand while I was in the process of drawing, for 4 or 6 hours, and then they would move off. And I'm sure they improved the drawing, because even though I was an art major in college, I kind of went to photography and video and production, so I was a little rusty. And I'm sure they really helped to inspire that work. So, it's so interesting how these beings are still alive in the spirit world, and how we can interact with them if our heart is pure and our consciousness is pure.
Well, boy, way to go. That really condensed an enormous amount of knowledge and information in just a matter of 10 minutes. That was really great. Now, we got to take a break here. When we return, as you said, we lost his teachings, the teachings, because, well, you didn't note this, but you noted in the book, they were purposely destroyed. It's not that people were lazy and couldn't find them and stuck them somewhere and then couldn't remember where, but but they were destroyed intentionally.
You're so cute. Yeah, you're right. They did everything they could. They literally sent out teams to destroy them. And
correct.
Fortunately, from the Nag Hammadi text and the Dead Sea Scrolls from 1945 and 1947, that's when they were discovered. We have some of that has been preserved by the Essenes, thank goodness. So I know you need to go to a break, so
yeah.
I look forward to you talking on the other side.
Well, when we come back, I'm going to ask you about, this is one of the other great pluses about your book, the information on the ancient mysteries and the Great White Brotherhood. Now, this is really key as far as I'm concerned. Most people ignore it, and that's a big mistake. We'll be back with our guest, Tricia McCannon. Jesus, the explosive story of the 30 lost years in the ancient mystery religions, Hampton Roads Publishing in 2010. Visit Tricia's website for more information on her books and readings and talks. Tricia McCannon, McCannon.com.
Hello, I'm Michael Bastine, co-author of Iroquois Supernatural, and you are listening to 21st Century Radio with Dr. Bob Hieronimus. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and we hope you enjoy all the work that we're doing for the people.
Welcome back to 21st Century Radio with our guest Tricia McCannon. Of course, I knew you knew the name of this book, right? The Explosive Story of the 30 Lost Years and the Ancient Mystery Religions, Hampton Roads. Well, I know that my listeners know this. I one time was going to become a priest. I was very serious about it. Then I discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls, and then I discovered the Gnostic teachings, and I realized somebody forgot a lot of history. And of course, it wasn't forgotten. It was just wiped out, and so were so many of the people that were involved in it. Let's see. Tricia, who is or are the Great White Brotherhood, and how are they connected and related to Jesus?
Wow. Well, we all know the story of the three magi that came to visit him at his birth. And, of course, the term magi comes from the words magician, and we think magicians, are, during the fundamentalist Christian era, we thought magicians were bad, but yet here are these three, kings or three magi, whether they were kings of countries or they were spiritual kings, masters, basically, that came to honor him. And we know they were astrologers and astronomers because they were following some star, the Star of Bethlehem. Now, whether that was a UFO, whether that was a astrological conjunction, I talk about at great length in my book.
You sure do.
I take a look at all the options, but we do know that there were actually independent reports of it. There's a report from Bethlehem, from the rabbi of that town, who basically said that it was like, this bright light came and shone down around the whole town, and it was like, like a big full moon, but even brighter. And they thought that the gods were coming back. I mean, everyone was trying to figure out what was happening. And, of course, that was the same kind of experience that the shepherds had, too, except that they were hearing this incredible celestial music coming down at the same time. So what was your question? I'm sorry, I've gone down this whole Bethlehem path.
Well, we're at the Great White Brotherhood.
Oh, yeah, the Great White Brotherhood. Yes, the Magi. So the Great White Brotherhood is actually a group of spiritual masters that are both on this planet and off this planet, who are beings that have achieved enlightenment, spiritual enlightenment and oneness, and really wish to help humanity to move towards this enlightenment for each and every one of us. And so, they are people who have come down and gone through the same kind of suffering that many of us do. They've gone through hundreds of lifetimes like many of us have gone through, and eventually achieved a level of high consciousness oneness with the divine. And they set up these great mystery schools that we know were going for at least 4,000 years before Jesus and over 400 years after Jesus, including some of the ones we know of in the Greek traditions, like Pythagoras' school and Plato's school, Aristotle, and then the Neoplatonists, that, all this is very well known in history. And, of course, the Neoplatonist schools combine the Christian wisdom and the teachings of Jesus with a lot of the wisdom that had come before in a beautiful marriage where they showed how Jesus was working within the laws of the universe, and that, it wasn't charlatanry. It was actually the fact that his consciousness was at such a high level that he could actually command the elements and so forth. And so all this, of course, was disbanded and destroyed by Constantine, by Theodosius around. The Theodosian decrees came out around 394 something A.D. Or after Jesus, or we can call it CE for Common Era, however we want to refer to it. So the Great White Brotherhood had chapters all around the world. The Essenes were one of their chapters. And, of course, we know that Jesus studied with the Essenes from about the age of 8 till about the age of 13 when he had been bar mitzvahed. He was actually stationed in Mount Carmel, and that was up in Galilee. Galilee was in the northern part of Israel, and Jerusalem is in the southern part. And Mount Carmel, there was a school there, and that's the school that John the Baptist went to. It's the school Jesus went to. And there was a cave there called the Cave of Elijah, and that was the cave that Elijah had gone in to have his visions and so forth in the Old Testament. So it was a very, time-honored place, a holy place, so to speak. And this is where the Essenes had their school. And, of course, they had 9 separate centers. And most of us don't know where those centers were. Mount Carmel was one, but they worked, in the Trinity. So the Trinity cubed is 9 specific centers. And so Mary, the mother, and Joseph, the father, the Essenes, they were all Essenes. Joseph of Arimathea was an Essene. He was wealthy. He was a tin merchant, and he had about 5 ships, and he went back and forth up to Britain, to the Casterati Mountains, to mine tin. And tin was extremely important to the Romans because it was used in the making of bronze weapons. So without the tin, they couldn't combine the metals to make the swords that they used in battle. Mm-hmm. So Joseph of Arimathea actually had been given the honorary title of a decurion, which is a very high title within the Roman Empire, and it's because of his importance. And he was, wealthy. He was able to afford Jesus and Mary, his mother, the opportunity. After when they were little, they fled to Egypt. We all know this from the Bible. But then they came back after Herod, the Great, died when Jesus was about 7, and Joseph settled in Galilee, and Jesus and Mary went with Joseph of Arimathea up to the Celtic lands where he met the Druids for the first time, and they weathered over a whole season, fall and winter there, and then they came back in the spring. We have, historical reports of this. And then, of course, he was with the Essenes from 8 till about probably 13. We know he bar mitzvahed at 12. That's what that whole journey down to test the young men was that we read about in the Bible. And then, of course, he vanishes. But what happened then was he went up to the Celtic lands again, and he was with them for a year or two, but he was so advanced that they said send him on to India because he was already, such an enlightened being. And the Celts were another chapter of the Great White Brotherhood, and so were the Persians, where the Magi had come from. So were the Indians, the East Indians, let's say the Hindus and the Buddhists. So he trained with the Buddhists. He graduated from there about 19 or 20. He began teaching his own things, and he very quickly collected, 3,000, 5,000 people who showed up to hear him speak, and this, of course, threatened the caste system. There was a very strong caste system in India at the time, and the Brahmins held the reins of all the spiritual books. Those were passed down generationally, and then, the royalty, they got to hear the religious readings. The military got to hear it sometimes. The nobles got to hear it sometimes at certain, occasions. But like the peasants and the farmers never got to hear, and especially the untouchables, they never got to hear spiritual wisdom because, of course, if they couldn't spiritually evolve, then, they would continue to reincarnate in the same cycle and continue to be, the lower-class citizens. Yeah. And the higher class wanted to maintain their position. So, again, it was, politics. And so I found 2 reports of assassins being sent to kill Jesus because he was teaching everybody, very democratic. Yeah. He looked at every soul as worthy, and this, of course, threatened the status quo. So there are two reports, one that the farmers and the peasants warned him, and one that the Magi reappeared and like soul travel and warned him. And so he fled to Rajagira. And Rajagira was a Buddhist community, and he lived there for 6 years, and he learned to speak and write and read the language of Pali, P-A-L-I, and he was accepted by the Buddhists as the second Buddha that the first Buddha had predicted would come 500 years after him. Mm-hmm. Buddha had predicted that a perfectly realized being would come 500 years after me, and Jesus could have just stayed there. He didn't have to leave and come back, but he was very aware that he had a mission, and so he chose to come back. And then I had track him through the Tower Pass along the Silk Road, where the Magi led him and met him, and he was trained in the Persian mysteries. And most of us don't know anything about these great mystery schools, but there was a group called the Sarmang Society, and this is a society that we only hear about in more modern times through the writings of Gurdjieff. But the Sarmang Society had a deep and powerful knowledge of the stars and the cycles of time, the cycles and the ages of human evolution and human consciousness. And they believed that they had discovered the existence of a being so powerful, basically a son of God, so powerful that he could insert himself into any age that he wished. And he usually would appear between the change of the ages. So in other words, between the age of Aries and the age of Pisces, which is when Jesus came, or between the age of Gemini and Taurus, which is when Mithra came. Or now, we're at the end of the age of Pisces, the beginning of the age of Aquarius. So now, or in the next 20 years, or 50 years, or 100 years, this being would be due to return. So they had been waiting on this being's return, and Jesus was recognized as that being. It was called the Saroshant. That's the term that they use for this being. And he was also known as the Aeon, A-I-O-N, who comes at the beginning of each eon, or 2160-year cycle. So these are all examples of the great spiritual mystery schools that had been set up thousands of years before by the great master Thoth. And, of course, Thoth was the god of wisdom in ancient Egypt. And Jesus, of course, was trained in these schools. And then, of course, he came back to Galilee when he was about 27. I have some reports of him there visiting Mary and Martha and Lazarus, who were like his best friends.
With that, we must pause at the top of the hour, and we'll return next hour with our guest, Tricia McCannon, Jesus, the Explosive Story of the 30 Lost Years in the Ancient Mystery Religions, Hampton Roads Publishing, 2010. You can visit her website at Tricia McCannon, McCannon.com. Brother Ziggy will be returning to 21st Century Radio. Yes, he'll be joining us, and there's a lot of wonderful things we need to touch on with him. He has a book on cooking, a cookbook. He's one of the great cooks. This is amazing. It's wonderful. Welcome back to 21st Century Radio with our guest, Tricia McCannon. Jesus, the Explosive Story of the 30 Lost Years. Haven't you wondered about what happened during those 30 years? It always puzzled me. I had to know sooner or later, and I'm glad I found someone who can confirm what many people have suggested, but have never been able to confirm to my expectations, because I'm a Virgo, and that's a problem. It really is, because you want to get things right the first time, and when you make mistakes, I don't like myself when I do that. But anyway, we're back with our guest, Tricia McCannon, and I want to point out one more important thing here. I'm holding up this book to the microphone. Those of you who've been listening to us for almost 30 years, some of you have been able to train yourself to read something over a microphone. That's correct. So I'm holding up page 3 of this extraordinary work. And it deals with the wisdom orders and the mystery schools. And there are 12 of them. And this is exciting to me because I knew many of them, but she's added on things here that were missing from my analysis, mainly because I had 1,400 other things to do at the time. So I certainly want to thank you for this wonder. Who did the drawing here of the heart of Christ?
Are you talking to me, Bob?
Yep. Who did this drawing of the heart of Christ? Page 3 of chapter 1 of the Wisdom Orders.
I did that.
That's extraordinary.
I did that.
This is a great teaching tool right here. You know.
Yes, thank you. There's a wheel of. I have one of the outer orders and the inner orders,
That's
and
right.
I think the inner orders didn't make it into the book. Although there's obviously of these quote outer orders, there are obviously deep and profound, beautiful teachings from all over the world. They have an inner aspect, but there's sort of there was a wheel that I teach in my mystery school. As you may or may not know, I've been teaching the great spiritual mysteries for many years, and I've had a mystery school called the Phoenix Fire Lodge, the Order of the Eagle and the Dove, for 12 years. And for many years, I just taught here in Atlanta in person. In fact, I had people coming from all over the Southeast and even people flying in from San Francisco and Santa Fe. But, you know, the classes, there were 12 classes, and they'd be about every 5 weeks. So as you can imagine, that's a little pricey for some people to fly in all the time. So for years, I had people asking me, do you have, an online class? And I had to say, no, sorry, I don't. And so finally, about 3 years ago, I got the first 12 discourses up online, so people anywhere. And I now have students in, Belgium and Germany and Canada, across the U.S., even in Dubai, I'm not kidding. And you can order them, and they're $99 a piece, which is really reasonable. Or you can actually order like the first 3 for, $225, so it saves you $75. And they're each, probably the shortest one's 100 pages. Most of them are 130, 150, even 180 pages. And they're, of course, all sorts of gorgeous, beautiful drawings, processes, knowledge, information on everything from the mystery schools to hermetics to the 14 different kinds of dreams, to soul travel, astral travel, the tree of life, the path of the return, Native American twisted hair teachings about the mineral and the crystal kingdoms and the plant kingdoms and the animal kingdoms and shamanism and psychic self-protection. And so it's always best to start at the beginning. I've had people, ask me if they can jump around. Certainly each one stands alone, but it's much wiser. Just start at the beginning. It doesn't take that long. And what happens is, you can order them online at my website. Go to the part that says Mysteries at the top, and then there are all these drop-downs. So for the online classes, each class has its own page with an excerpt and a table of contents. You can really get a feel for each one of the discourses. And then at the bottom of the page, you can either order it separately or you can order it as part of a set of 3. And then I get to order in, and I send them individually as a separate email, and they're a PDF. So you just click on it, opens up just like a book. It's really just like a book. And I always tell people, just print it off, put it in a 3-ring notebook. That way you can write in it, you can take notes, you can highlight the things that you want to, and study it. Take it to lunch with you. And, I let couples, if you're living under the same roof, they can study a discourse together for no extra money. That's fine. Whether you're married or married in your heart is fine. And so the first 12 are up. And the second level of the mysteries really is all Egyptian, although there's Egyptian that's woven all through the first level, along with Christian and Celtic and Native American and many sources, Buddhist. Really, the higher you go in consciousness, the more you see that it's a universal conversation. The masters aren't arguing with one another. It's just when we're down here stuck in dogma or kind of a smaller, more limited view that's more territorial or fear-based. And, of course, that's what we're raised in. So there are many good people who have good hearts. They truly love God, and they are seeking, the divine. But they've been conditioned to believe it had to be accessed through only one religion. Mm-hmm. But the truth is, as I said, there's the exoteric path and the esoteric. And the exoteric is full of rules and regulations and dogma and guilt and blame and shame, not just in Christianity, but in many religions. And then the esoteric is where you're really able to make that connection with the divine, and you begin to realize that masters are teachers. They're people like us that are further on the path. Even divinities, divinities are beings that are even further on the path than the masters. They're holding a larger piece, if you will, of God consciousness. They, any true divinities, they're not really interested in being worshipped, or they're interested in helping us. They're interested in helping us awaken to our own connection with the divine. Mm-hmm. So we can realize that, the divine is in everything, in everyone. It's in, the squirrel that's running up the tree, and it's in the tree. It's in, humans, it's in animals, it's in plants. I sometimes think of ourselves as like fish swimming around in water going, I don't see any evidence of any water. Do you see any evidence? Nah, I haven't seen water. I hear there's something called water. We're so much in the body of God, we don't even realize that we are the fish in the big goldfish pond, which is the universe, and that the entire universe is made of God stuff. And, there are different beings that have called it different things. The adamantine particles of love is one of my favorites, that everything is vibrating in love. So the more we can vibrate in that love, the more the universe responds to us, the more we attract that to ourselves. So when, Jesus tells us to love our neighbor as ourselves and that love is the key, what he's really talking about, he's giving us the fundamental vibrational frequency of the universal mind. And it's through aligning with the universal heart and spirit and vibration and mind that we're able to begin to manifest our reality. We're able to begin to attract to us things that are in line with our divine purpose, our divine plan, which is part of what my next book begins to talk about, the nature of the soul and the journey we all take and what we're doing down here, what the course curriculum is. And, I really wish that when we came out of our mom's womb, there was a little handbook that said, you are here. Okay.
Yes, I agree.
This is your past soul history, okay?
Yeah.
And you chose to come into this life for this reason. But, most of us are born with amnesia. Or if we don't have it when we're, a lot of people don't have it when they're 6. But by the time they get to be 7 or 8 and, the cognitive mind kicks in and the parents are doing the best they can to help the soul to assimilate, learn your ABCs, go to school, obey the rules. After a while, all that deeper spiritual connection that we come in with many times just kind of gets left in the dust.
It sure does.
Yeah,
sure. I hesitate to move in another direction here because all I've been thinking about is the joy it's going to, not all, but the joy it's going to be for me to hand Ziggy Marley this book on Jesus. Because,
oh my gosh, I loved his song. It sounded really cool.
Yeah, well, he's very cool, right? And he's, it's really, we have a relationship that goes back to about 30 years. But, he has great thirst for knowledge, great thirst for love and acting in love and that aspect of it. And I have enormous respect for him. And so we're looking forward to, in a couple of weeks, to be able to say, as usual, when we say goodbye to him, we read all the stuff give him the stuff that he shares with his family, not just his physical family, but and all the musicians in his group. We give out libraries of books to many, to the Hendricks families and other families, because they don't know where to look to find a lot of this information. So you made it a lot easier for us, especially in trying to explain all the mystery schools, because people that get involved in, well, all these mystery, are they fighting with each other or something? I mean, they act as if other people that dislike this material, to say that, that all of them are wrong. And yet they all seem to work together on a much higher level. And that's one of the great values of just this one page. I'm sorry, I better stop. I'm stopping. So
No, really. I mean, just a little bit I heard of that song is totally magical and wonderful. And, of course, Bob Marley was wonderful. I imagine this is his son, right?
Yes, this is his son.
Well, they brought so much light and love to the world. And, I hope his music continues to just expand and his success to get greater and greater, because we need all the joy and love and light and optimism that we can possibly get, especially in the political climate that we seem to be waking up to every morning.
Yeah. Well, look, I'll tell you what, in regards to this, I don't want to forget this. I hope you don't mind my putting in your little package of thank yous a guitar pick from his dad.
No.
Yes.
No, that's like too precious.
No. This was made by his family, but he didn't play with it. You're right. I could buy a house with.
Oh my gosh! Well, what a profound honor. I might have to start playing the guitar.
Yes, you're going to have to play the guitar. We'll get you together with Ziggy, because I think he would just love learning this material. It's really important for people that like to stay ahead of things. And he does. He's a great leader. We got time out here on the playing field with Tricia McCannon, and we'll get back to some other important questions I need to ask. And this is what you can bone up on during this time. Who is the thrice greatest Hermes? We'll be right back with Tricia McCannon. Jesus, the explosive story of the 30 lost years, and the Ancient Mystery Religions, Hampton Roads Publishing. Visit Tricia's website for more info on her books and readings and talks.
Hi, this is Dr. Jean Shinoda Boland. I am a Jungian analyst, an author, and an advocate for a United Nations NGO World Conference on Women, and the author of Goddesses in Every Woman and Like a Tree. And I've just been interviewed on 21st Century Radio with Dr. Bob Hieronimus, and we have covered the waterfront, from contemporary to archetypal to activism to all kinds of things. I think you will enjoy the program. I can be found at www.jeanboland.com.
Okay. Pretty exciting stuff as far as I'm concerned. Who is the thrice great Hermes?
Wow, what a great question, Bob. Actually, Thoth is one of my favorite beings. He was known as the god of wisdom in ancient Egypt, and then, of course, the Greeks began to call him Hermes, or Hermes Trismegistus, or thrice great Hermes. He was also known as Mercury, the messenger of the god, the scribe of the gods. And it was said that he wrote over 42, well, it said actually that he wrote over 365 books, but that there were 42 we know of in the Library of Alexandria in northern Egypt at the time of Jesus and past that time, because we know this from the early Christian father Clement of Alexandria, who talks about the 42 books that were written by Thoth in the library, and they were on healing, law, architecture, mathematics, sacred geometry, herbs, astronomy, astrology, magic, theurgy. And theurgy is different from theology. Theology is kind of what they teach you when you go to seminary, and that's talking about God. Theurgy is making a direct connection with God or with the divine. So one's more of a mental exercise, and the other is more of a heart-based spirit encounter, let us say. And so those books were said to contain all the wisdom of the world, and as we know, the early Christians burned them, and then later when they were lot of them were replaced or recopied, or they had copies. The Muslims came in and burned them in the 600s. And so, to my knowledge, we don't have those 700,000 scrolls and books that were so very, very important in terms of really recording a far more ancient history of the world than most of us think about or even know about. You know, I think this was in large part by the Christian and the Muslim church to try to rewrite history. And it's from my point of view, it was like giving us a historical lobotomy in truth, because you know that there was probably information on Lemuria and Atlantis, on these earlier ages of human civilizations, on the great spiritual masters, probably the Anunnaki gods that visited the planet. I mean, so much information that we are only now just beginning to piece together in some kind of a real timeline through the discoveries of some of the things I was talking about earlier. Right now I'm putting together these amazing new presentations on the scientific evidence for earlier advanced civilizations, because we've found so much of it, like screws in 300-million-year-old rock and a three-pronged plug. I'm not kidding, in a 400-million-year-old rock that geologists have said the rock grew around the plug. So, I mean, either ETs were visiting and threw the garbage out the window, you know, and 4 million years ago, or else, you know, there's something else going on with our history that we have no real sense of. And we know anthropology kind of pushes Homo sapiens back 200 to 300,000 years ago. In fact, they've now found, like you remember with Lucy, the female from South Africa, where they have traced the X chromosome of all living people to Lucy, who was like I think she was Australopithecus, about 3.3 million years ago or something. But now they have a Y chromosome that they've managed to trace to men that they date back to about 270,000 years ago, saying that basically, you know, Homo sapiens, as we know of them, and later Homo sapiens sapiens came around, we believe, currently in anthropological circles, that came up about 40,000 years ago. So, but we could have a big conversation about this, because this is one of the many fields of interest that I have, where I'm really trying to look at the big picture, and how I have come to see how this fits together is that basically we are immortal souls. We have the spark of the divine within us. Some of us are more aware of it. Some of us are less aware of it. Some of us have clouded that spark of light and love and beauty through, you know, terrible conditioning or trauma, or not believing in ourselves or loving ourselves, not realizing we're connected to the whole, and acting in selfish, you know, a destructive manner. But ultimately, all of us are on a big journey, and that journey is we descend into the lower worlds of time and space. We are playing, you know, we're kind of, every lifetime is a series of tests. Every single day, we have a choice of being angry or being kind. We have a choice of being impatient or being understanding. We have a choice of being destructive or being constructive. And so every day, every single day, we get a new opportunity, and we make slow but steady progress, hopefully, so that at the end of every lifetime, we've learned something about love and kindness and unity and the divine within ourselves and within others. And we come a little closer, lifetime after lifetime, step by step, to this divine wisdom that Jesus embodied so profoundly. And that the whole thing about Easter is that, you know, in the mystery schools, they understood that the soul is immortal. But because we have amnesia and the curtain is mostly closed for people, they actually deliberately induced out-of-body, near-death experiences. And just as people die now and then they come back from the dead and they report going to the other side and seeing these vast cities of light and these angels and these beautiful beings, they deliberately set up these deep initiation processes, aside from all the teaching and all the other things they did to prepare the student. Ultimately, it was this theurgy experience where the person, through out-of-body, soul travel, you know, near death, they literally hadn't experienced themselves, where they went to the other side. They saw what it was like. They didn't have to take somebody's word for it. They could realize that they were immortal and that what we do in every lifetime matters. It matters in not only in terms of who we affect in the third dimension, but it matters in terms of the consciousness we achieve so that when we die, we go to these various levels based on our consciousness, and also it affects the next lifetime when we come back because, we can't suddenly go from being an asshole, forgive the French, on radio to being, a master in one lifetime. It's a journey of spiritual unfoldment and evolution that takes time. And so they understood this, the masters did, and this is what the great mystery schools were set up for. And Hermes actually began all of these mystery schools because even though he was one of the Anunnaki gods who, lived for 400,000 years or 500,000 or, 1 year on their planet was 3,600 of our years. So if they lived 100 of their years, that's 360,000 of our years, which is mind-blowing to us. It's hard for us to even conceive of that. And then they took, the soma or the nectar from the tree of life, which doubled their lifespan. So on their planet, they lived about 750,000 years. That's 750,000 years. So, of course, they would appear through time. We were living, at one point, like Methuselah and Noah and Enoch. Those guys had very long lifespans, but, even 1,000 years is a drop in the bucket next to when you're talking about, 750,000 years. So the gods would appear from age to age, and they'd appear completely unchanged. So, this is just because they were, the gods with a little g, doesn't mean they were completely enlightened. Mm-hmm. There were some that were just as secular and, worldly based as any human, and there are others that were spiritually much more evolved, and they had, tried to really embody this Christ consciousness. And certainly Thoth was one of them, and Isis, who was his daughter, was one, and Horus, who was her son, and Thoth's grandson, was one. Osiris was Isis's husband. He was one of those Christed beings. And as I talk about in the Jesus book, in my opinion, that was the same soul that incarnated as Jesus. And there's a lot of reasons that I say that. The MO is the same, a being who comes to earth, who loves humanity, who travels and heals and teaches, who brings light and joy to others, and who was taken out by the dark forces, and then through the power of love, Isis, is resurrected. And of course, what Jesus portrayed in the crucifixion and in the being coming, rising from the dead, was the immortal nature of the soul. The fact that he played out this great mystery drama that had been played in secret within the mystery schools, that you could die and come back and be reborn. He played it out on the world stage in Jerusalem before some very dark forces. Those Jewish patriarchs that wanted him taken out, the Roman patriarchs that wanted him taken out. And so this was an incredible thing he did. And I have no doubt that he could have chosen not to do it. He could have not only chosen not to do it by staying in, Persia and India and the Buddhist communities and the Druids and all these places, the Egyptian community where he was for 7 years, all these places that knew him and saw him and loved him. But even in Jerusalem, he was psychically, spiritually aware enough that he could have simply avoided being caught or teleported himself or called in a bunch of angels to move him out of the harm's way. But he deliberately chose that crucifixion in order to have that mystery drama play out. And as he says over and over again, let those who have the ears to hear, hear, and let those that have the eyes to see, see. And this, whenever he says that, it is he's speaking to the initiates. He's speaking to people who can pull back the veil of the mundane world, the exoteric, and see the deeper meaning about what it is, that mystery drama of the crucifixion and the resurrection that we celebrate now 2,000 years later on Easter Day, what it really represented and how very important it was.
Whoa, boy, that was... You really unloaded there, dear.
Well, I mean, as you know, this was the ancient celebration of the goddess of fertility, Ostara. Ostara, that's why we have the Easter bunny and the Easter eggs, which doesn't make sense from the Christian perspective of, died on the cross. But it was the goddess of the cosmic egg, the goddess of spring, the one who birthed the new world, the new life, all the little baby animals and all the new plants. And, she doesn't really have a shape other than maybe like an egg, but it's the divine mother aspect that oversees the birth of the universe. And that's what Ostara was. And that's where we get estrus today, and ovaries and all those words that derive from Ostara, and that's where we get Easter today. So that's the female aspect of the mother that births the world. Jesus is the other aspect of the one who is immortal, who dies for his love of humanity and for his willingness to undergo pain in the mortal world in order to make a point. And the point he was making was that we are all immortal and that our souls live on and that the spirit is greater than the flesh.
Yep.
That spirit trumps matter. So that's kind of a big point, don't you think?
Yes, obviously. And, one of the things I want to return to, because you brought up the divine feminine a couple of times, when we come back, we're going to take not our final break, but our bottom break here. You note that we have largely lost the ability to achieve this integration and balance because our culture denigrates the divine feminine, and I'd like you to go into explaining that for us. It's important. We'll be back with our guest, Tricia McCannon, Jesus, the Explosive Story of the 30 Lost Years and Ancient Mystery Religions, Hampton Roads Publishing. And you can visit her website at triciamccannon.com.
Hi, I'm Reverend Dr. Karen Tate. I'm the author of Goddess Calling, Inspirational Messages and Meditations of Sacred Feminine Liberation Theology, and the radio show host of Voices of the Sacred Feminine Radio on Blog Talk. My website is www.karentate.com. And you've been listening to 21st Century Radio with Dr. Bob Hieronimus. I hope you'll read my books and discover why the spirituality of the sacred feminine is today's new liberation theology, setting us free from the domination and exploitation of patriarchy, and how that patriarchy has kept women and men from achieving their fullest potential.
She must have been reading my mind. We're in our last segment, and I'm sorry for that because I've got about 40 more questions. However, I'm going to try to concentrate on 3 more questions. And that is, Tricia, they are going to be, that's interesting that we had this particular question here. You note that we have largely lost the ability to achieve this integration and balance because our culture denigrates the divine feminine, and I want you to explain that, and then I'd love to try to get to who are the sons of God. Friends, there's so much in this information. A book that you really need to get your hands on, and we might have time for one. We didn't even get to there are 4 canonical Gospels, but there were many other Gospels. We'll never get to touch on them, but this book does, such as the Gospels of Thomas, Philip, Barnabas, Peter, Mary, and the book on Clement. I mean, this is just filled with information. We covered a bit of it, but you can only do so much in a limited 2 hours with all these commercials. So can we start with the divine feminine, and because our culture denigrates the divine feminine, you note that we have largely lost the ability to achieve integration and balance. What can we do about this, and can you explain it?
Well, first, I'd like to give a little historical context for this. This wasn't always so, and in fact, one of the things I discovered in the research of my book is we have discovered through archaeology and anthropology that basically for a lot of the first 200,000 years that Homo sapiens were down here on Earth, that everyone observed that who gave birth was the feminine of every species, and so who would have birthed the universe? Well, logically, naturally, it would be the Divine Mother. That makes sense because, you can see that's what nature tells us. So God was considered the Divine Mother, and she was the force that birthed everything, sustained life for everyone, and recycled everything once we die. It was the Trinity, the Divine Trinity, and life had, the maiden, mother, crone, or the youth, the man, the sage. Everyone had this natural cycle, and death was part of it because they understood that we were immortal. And we see this even in the burial graves of prehistoric man, where they put people into the earth in a womb-like position, with possessions preparing for the afterlife. So then what happened is, it became the Divine Mother and Father. Well, that makes sense, too, because, of course, we have a beautiful male aspect in the world and a beautiful female, and it's the joining of the two that creates life. And then it became the Divine Father, Mother, Daughter, and Son. In other words, there's an aspect of the Mother and Father, or God, the One, that it splits itself into two as the force of love and power, or love and wisdom, and that part remains in heaven. But then there are aspects of these divine feminine and masculine forces that come to earth, the sons and daughters of God. And they come down as fully enlightened beings who come to try to raise the consciousness of humanity. And I talk about them in my book about Jesus, and again, the other book, The Return of the Divine Sophia, which is the second book kind of in this series, where we're really discussing the discovery of this archaeology and anthropology and this bigger picture that's supported by history that most people don't know a lot about because, as you said, the patriarchy has suppressed it. So we went on pretty well during that period where it was the Divine Father, Mother, Daughter, and Son. And in fact, we did not have war for thousands of years, thousands of peaceful civilizations that didn't have to have war. Well, then the patriarchy decided they wanted the power, and everybody else had to bow to them. So they set out to get rid of the mother, the daughter, and the son. And they basically did about, the better part about 3,000 years ago. And we had war, and more war starting from, actually probably about 4,000 years ago. From about the beginning of the Age of Aries, it became very conflictual, lots of wars all over, Assyria, Babylon, the Hebrews, Egypt, Persia. Everyone was fighting for 2,000 years. And then we got the son back with Christianity 2,000 years ago, but we never really got the mother and the daughter back. I mean, yes, we know about Mary, the mother, but the Catholic Church makes a very important point of saying, well, she wasn't really divine. She just lent her womb for the Son of God to be born. So don't anybody think she was special. Despite the fact that Mary has appeared in over 250 apparitions of Mary that people have seen, miracles, statues crying. I mean, amazing things with Mary, okay? Yeah. Because, of course, she sees the suffering of the world. And so she was our aspect of the divine feminine that was left to us, but then the Catholic Church kind of made her into the obedient virgin. No, she was never allowed to have sex after Jesus. No, he couldn't have any brothers and sisters, even though we learn in the Bible that he does have brothers and sisters. Yeah. And so, and we find this in some of the other texts, too. He had quite a few brothers and sisters, although he was the oldest. And then we wind up losing the daughter altogether. She's shoved under the rug, and no one even thinks to ask that there is a daughter. So, of course, poor little Mary Magdalene, the daughter, Sophia, got turned into a prostitute. And if she wasn't, the reason we think that is because in, I think it was 591 A.D., Pope Gregory, in his 33 homily, said something like, basically, where did she get that expensive ointment that she used to anoint our Lord? Clearly, she must have gotten it by perfuming her body with forbidden acts of the flesh. So that is like complete conjure that he made that up.
He made it up.
I mean, purely made it up. And then the patriarchy took it and just kind of ran with it because it suited their agenda. And, of course, there are people who have done other levels of research where they kind of showed literally that Mary and Jesus, it looks like, had one child and could have had two or even three, that there was a lineage of Merovingian kings that was throughout France. Most of them were very peaceful, high consciousness beings who would have let us say, a war counselor, although they themselves weren't warriors. But some of them did become strong as warriors. They united a lot of France and Spain in that area, and this was extremely threatening to the Catholic Church. So the work from the book Holy Blood, Holy Grail that I think came out in the 70s, 1975, I believe, by 3 authors, that book really takes a serious look at what that Merovingian lineage was, that the Catholic Church basically went up and made a deal with them saying, look, there were 23 sects of Christianity at that point. If you will support our version of Christianity, we will support the lineage of Jesus in perpetuity forever and ever. And, of course, they lied because they just wanted to get the power. And so the Merovingians said, okay. And so, a couple of hundred years later, they had a full-scale massacre of all the men, forced the women to marry into the usurper line, and that's kind of who then began to take power in Europe because the Catholic Church was all behind that. And all this has been heavily covered up. And, of course, it was political, it was monetary, it was social, it was control. And, you really have to dig to find this stuff, but you can find it. And it's good that it's coming out because there was just a whole twisting of the real teachings of Jesus. Like, for example, St. Augustine, oh, my goodness, what a piece of work he was.
Oh.
I mean, he taught that we are damned from the time we're born
yes.
because our parents had sex.
Yes.
We're damned, and the only cure is Christianity. And, of course, that was really because he himself had a very rambunctious sexual libido, ran around and partied and had sex with lots of people, and his mother was Christian and made him feel so guilty that when he converted after having an affair with somebody for 13 years, he got engaged to a 12-year-old. Oh, yeah, that's really
yes.
In order to assuage his conscience, a virgin, 12, okay? I mean, what a piece of work.
Yeah.
And after that, 2 popes ratified it. So, the conversation about the great mysteries and the great sons of God and who they were and what they really taught is such a big conversation that I had to kind of put it in 2 books. Mm-hmm. So the one on Jesus, you can just look up Tricia McCannon Jesus, and, of course, you can get it from my website or Amazon. And then the Sophia book is a whole other piece to that where we are looking at how the divine feminine, I mean, the women used to be able to own property. If their husbands died, they could keep the house. Well, this became, untenable to the Catholic Church. They wound up deciding, here they'd send the boys off in battle, kill the sons, kill the husbands through war and battles, religious battles, and then the wife would be turned out. And this is where the whole story of the witches or the crones gathering twigs in the forest to survive, they felt so guilty because basically the church wanted the property. And that's the same thing, too, with the ministers. In the beginning, all the ministers, they could get married, no problem. But then guess what? They left their homes to their children and their wife when they died. The church wanted that property, so they changed the rules. Mm-hmm. And so, it's gotten out of balance, and it's very sad because even somebody who is a priest or a minister has the right to have the closeness and warmth and love and intimacy of a wife or a husband and a family, and to try to impose something other than that creates this sort of twist in the field that we've seen where these Catholic priests have been accused of pedophilia and things like that, because their options for getting some kind of sexual contact were cut off from adults. So they picked children, which was even more horrible. So, they need to recorrect that so that, both men and women who all have, has no gender. We've all been men and women. Both can serve in spiritual capacities, and we can come more into balance. And men and women both should be allowed to love God, serve the divine, but also have a full life that remains in balance. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely, because that's why we have the imbalance and why these crazy things happen.
Right.
Is that men can't control themselves, so therefore they have to punish the woman because, of course, it's all her fault. I have heard that a billion times, and it's truly amazing. And they're even especially everyone knows about Fox Network. If you haven't read the New York Times and what is going on over on the Fox Network, it's just amazing. Zoe and I worked for the Fox at one time. We quit when we found out what was going on. All the hidden sides of it, which is now out in the open, and the the demands for sexual experience with those who are talking on having their own shows. This has just been happening again for the fourth or fifth time. And
I think this all came out when I was in New York City, and so I'm a little bit behind with it. But if I remember, there's a very popular host that. There are all these, like, dozens and dozens of women that have come forward and said he sexually accosted them. And you know what? All they're interested in is the ratings. So It's like they're not even, here's supposedly a Christian-run station that's not even going to, give him a slap on the hand or fire him, even though he's obviously, run by his lowest chakras and not with the women's permission. He's there are people who are rapists, and they should go to jail. And they certainly shouldn't be having, high-rating talk shows where they're spewing their particular level of venom into the world.
Absolutely.
It's not good. I can't remember, what's the name of the guy?
Right now, was it the guy Bill O'Reilly, or was it?
Bill O'Reilly, yeah, the O'Reilly.
Before him, it was Aiken. Ailes, Ailes. And before that, there was someone else. And they hid all of this information for all this time. And most of the people that just listen to Fox never get the whole story. They never do, because it's not given. And that is very unfortunate. Well, we're almost out of time here. What would you like to leave with our listeners at this time?
Well, first off, thank you for having me on. And we have to do it again, Bob. And for those that are interested in learning more about the mystery schools or the lost years of Jesus or his teachings or the divine feminine, I would definitely say go to my website, TriciaMcCannonSpeaks.com or TriciaMcCannon.com. You'll find the books there, and you can order them from me along with a bunch of DVDs. You can look at the mystery school. There's a lot of cool stuff on that site.
Oh, thank you. But we're looking forward to your book on angels and what that means in the future. Thank you for joining us, Tricia McCannon. And that's the end of the hour. 21st Century Radio is produced by Hieronimus and Company. Our executive producer and research assistant is Laura Kortner. I'm Dr. Bob Hieronimus. And remember, shine your shoes and get a haircut.